Right now we're at the dam site for what we call a mason mill. This was a lumber mill, and this whole area of here was the dam that went across the brook, dammed up the brook. That was the original sluiceway that came all the way through, and if you look all the way down here, that sluiceway went probably 200 or 300 yards all the way down to the water wheel, the overshot water wheel that we saw a little bit earlier, and that was where the actual sawmill was. So they ran a reciprocating saw blade up there, going up and down, picking up the power from the water wheel.
So that's part of the dam?
Probably filled in. This is probably deep right here.
Yeah.
And so we're
like
come over the top.
That big rock probably fell off of there.
Yeah, and over here, there's a bunch of rocks fell off down in here.
But what's amazing is you look at this stuff. How the hell did they build all this?
How do they move all those rocks?
Yeah.
I know, just
all with oxen, horses, levers.
They were a lot stronger than back then.
Yeah.
The flume basically, for the purposes that we describe it here, is basically an enclosed wooden chamber, and what we have then, coming from the mill pond, is 300 gallons per second coming to occupy that flume chamber and to run the entire sawmill. Everything in this sawmill is run by water power. We can cut a log up to 24 feet long on this particular carriage and 36 inches in diameter. That's the maximum that we can cut. Right now we're cutting what I would consider to be sort of a medium-sized log. We're cutting 1-inch board that is used throughout the village for construction purposes. The stage that we're at right now, we then now have to move this particular log. We have to adjust it using cantilevers, rods, and a modified rack and pinion system at the far end, which is called the tail block. What we have to do there is to adjust to 1 1/4 inches rather than the 1-inch thickness that we are cutting. We adjust it to 1 inch here at the head block, which we do visually, and then what we do is to dog it in. Basically, dogging is to hit in metal rods into the wood to keep it stationary or relatively in place as the piece is being sawed. What we then have to do at the far end, or the tail block, is to make a similar adjustment, but also accommodating or taking into consideration the fact that we have a 1/4 inch thickness blade. So in order to do that, we have a template at the back and an arm that fits into those holes that are on the template, and we have to then adjust it to 1 1/4 inches. What Howard is doing right now is reversing carriage so that we are removing the blade from the log so that we indeed can then do the adjustment of the blade 1 inch, let's say to your right, which we call land side, so that we can make the next cut.
This is the site of the original coffin mill right here. It's the first dam above what is now Brigham Pond, and it used to be called Parker Pond. We're standing on the top of the dam, and over there was the spillway where the water went down underneath the dam, through the dam, into the water wheel, and then the factory was all down in front of us, where you see here. That's where they picked up the power, right off the top of from the dam, from the mill pond behind the dam here. Way back in the 1790s, this was first that fulling mill that you saw on the map that I showed you, the map of 1795. Eventually, this became the coffin mill, which was all built in, all in through here. You see some remnants of the old chimneys. And then the dam is right up above. We're going to walk up to see the dam. That's where they dammed up the water, and that's where the water power came from up in that area. And it came down through here. And this is where the site was. If you look up above, you'll see the dam, and in almost all of these mill sites, what they did was they dammed up the brook and created a mill pond. Then over here was an outlet that they could control to get power, and the water would come down from the mill pond into this sluiceway. This is probably, my guess, where their mill wheel was, and that's where they originally got their power, from the water wheel as it churned, and then by pulleys and shafts, and then brought the power from the turning water wheel back into the factory and ran belts for machines and whatnot to manufacture whatever it is they were manufacturing. But almost all of these mill sites have a big mill pond, and they're located all over Hubbardston. You'll find mill ponds along all these little rivers with dams that were originally there that eventually got washed out by the hurricanes.
Gary, this is where the TACK factory was, to the left of the falls. It had a big, big water wheel. It was also known as the Wachusett Nail Company.
My brother-in-law made his water wheel down there.
Really?
The goddamn thing was the size of ceiling, a great big.
Site of the old tack shop, and over here to the right was where the water wheel was located to do the power for the mill. Up above was the mill pond, and all the water was backed up, came down through here through the water wheel, and then the tack shop was located along in through here. This is where they made all of the tacks and nails, and originally, finally, the Phillips head screw was made here. Interesting thing is some of the folks that actually worked here were Ray Weed, Mildred Weed, Dorothy Weed, Irene Heel, Chet Maury, and Carl Fox, to name a few of the people who actually worked right here in the mill when it was originally built. Very interesting old area right here in Healdville. Yeah, the water wheel was actually right here. It was 12 feet in diameter. It was all handmade. Took a whole winter and a spring to build it. The steel was cut by hand with a cold chisel, and the holes were drilled by hand. The buckets were heated in a blacksmith forge and formed, and it was then riveted together with hot rivets. Spokes were installed, 2 bearings were put on either end, on either side of the wheel, and then it was set in place and ready to power the mill. And that provided the power for the mill to run all the machines with belt-driven machines that made all the tacks and screws and nails that people worked here and sorted out and shipped off to customers in Hubbardston and all around the area.
My brother-in-law made nails there quite a few years. He used to make all the nails with the butter and lard tub nails, yeah.
Oh, really? Small nails?
Yeah.
So you had a cutting
And then
machine?
finally they got up a groove and put it around the pail and on the cover, and they turned them on.
Really?
Put him out of business.
different size pulleys in there were so that whatever speed they wanted the machine to operate, they would change the belt onto a larger or smaller pulley, and that would increase or decrease the speed of the machine.
Down below, just below here, there were two more sites. I think one was a sawmill and one was a gristmill just below here.
Pitcherville Pond was. It was washed out in 1938 when the upper pond dam broke. It took out this dam. As you can see, here's the top of the dam, and it went all the way across over there. So it's a good 30 feet of water they had. There's just a brook running there now. My dad said that everyone in the village used to come swimming here. The guys would be on one side and the girls would be on the other. As you can see in this old photograph of a Sunday afternoon picnic. This is Henry Hill's house after the flood. It was washed out all the way out in the woods where, when I was a kid, we could see pots and pans out there in the woods. And here is Dot Hevermacky walking, and the house in the background, and to the right you can see the barn to the family farm. They called this factory pond because there were several factories along the bank here. There was a sawmill and a wax factory, and over there was a blacksmith shop. And there were several other little mills around here in the village that used the water power here to run the mills.
This is called the Apprentice Mill. Rumor has it, and I'm trying to find out from Frankie. Frankie Prentice told me that he thought that they actually took this mill and put it in the Dearborn Ford Museum. But I have no idea whether that's true. But I think the mill was built way back in the 1820s, back in there somewhere. I've got all the records back at home. Where the wheel was, and I think the mill itself, the sawmill itself, sat in here. That's generally what I found. So they picked up the power here, and then they sawed stuff here. So I have no idea. Yeah. Anyhow, let's take for.
It's some kind of a track. I don't.
The mill was built back in the 1820s.
Many generations of apprentices ran it. Remember, it went son to son.
Yeah, it did. It went from son to son. So it stayed in the family for a number of years, the Prentice family.
The stone up on the common came from here. And that's what they ground their corn with here. But did they use a sawmill here also?
Yeah, this was a sawmill originally.
Uh-huh. There's a mill here somewhere where they had the grinding wheel that's on the common.
Well, that might be down below, because I haven't really spent much time down below here. But it looks like, I know it looks like they have it dammed up down below for another dam. So.
A lot of them were saw and grain.
Yeah.
You 1800s.
Look for risers. This was one wall of a building that went down. The cornerstone is down there, and it went up there through that brush, and it's underneath that debris, the other foundation, and goes over there. Yeah, this is the wall right here of the old dam. And that's the other banking of it over there. All this was flooded way back.
This is Bennett's mill, and as far as the records are concerned, as far as I know, this was a shingle mill, and Bennett, I think, bought this land from Peck. Peck's mill is up above here, and he did shingles here. This is what's behind you is the dam, and it was dammed up, and then they had the power came down through here, and they had the water wheel probably right in here, and we think that the foundation for the mill itself was over here behind you. Once again, 1820s, somewhere in there. I don't have all the dates in my mind. I have to kind of look them up, but I'm pretty sure it's about. This is an older mill. This mill has been here a long, long time. Dam was right across here.
There's the mountain there, and then it's washed out here, and the mountain on the other side. The dam was right in there. This is wall that held back the mill pond.
Yeah, this is the site of Peck's mill. Now, I think it was Bennett actually bought the land for his mill from Peck. So Peck preceded it by 30, 40 years, I guess. And this was the dam right here where they dammed the water, and the mill pond was on the other side. Once again, I'm not too sure with this one. We aren't too sure. We haven't located the site of the mill itself. So the only thing we know, and this is, I believe that pond is known as Peck's Pond.
Why is this tree losing all its needles?
I don't know. It must be dying. See, this, as this goes further down, it picks up the Natty Brook.
Okay.
And then this goes into the Burnshire Brook, and then it goes into the Ware River.
Yep.
And this ends up...
This lands up down Hale Road. Hale Road Bridge.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. And then it continues, crosses Route 62. And after it crosses Route 62, it goes into the Burnshire River. Mm-hmm. And then it goes into the Ware River. And then it ends up in Boston.
Big rocks up here.
They were a little stronger back then.
I guess.
Pond was there, and here's the dam. Here's the well.
Because, you know, it's all supposition. That's one of the problems, is that we don't really have a lot of information about this mill. We know it was PECK'S mill, we know it was a sawmill, and they fed wood to the shingle mill down below. Okay. There's a couple of foundations in here. We don't know whether they were foundations for camps or foundations for the buildings to store stuff or for workshops or whatever. But this trough that you see right here goes all the way down through the woods and ties into the brook that we just crossed over here. So the question is...
To a dam, you said?
There's a dam there, and the question is, did they run water along here? If you go along, you can see areas where the rocks are piled up on either side. Who knows?
Yeah, further down there, it's a little deeper than what you see in here.
Yeah.
Well, this is aged.
So, but this is a very interesting site. We'd like to get some information about this and maybe see if we can find out what it is and maybe try to restore this site, because it's a beautiful spot and it's on state land. So, and we can get the cooperation of the state to help us restore somewhat the sites. So it's been around for years. Everybody knows that pond is PECK'S Pond. I think it's on one of the maps. It refers to it as PECK'S Pond. And so we know that this is the area where PECK'S mill was, and we know that Bennett owned the mill below. But that's about it. And we know that they go back to the early 1800s. How they operated the mill and the details of what happened here, we're going to take a lot of research to find out.
There is a sluiceway. Definitely looks like a sluiceway. This looks like where it could be the water wheel was.
You want me to read that?
Yeah.
Now we're grinding a mixture of grains. This one is corn, right. We do 2 parts corn, 1 part this other grain. What's that?
Wheat.
No, wheat's a little smaller. It doesn't grow very well in New England.
Oh, barley.
Barley is smaller as well.
Oats.
Oats.
There you go, oatmeal. You eat a lot of oatmeal.
Yeah, but in the 1830s, if you saw oats in it, you knew it was for your animals, not for you. Humans of English descent did not consider oats fit for human consumption.
Oh, wow.
They're notoriously difficult to grind. So, most people of English descent would not eat them. As a matter of fact, the dictionary from, I think it was 1826, defined oats as feed for horses, cattle, and Scotsmen. The Scottish and the Irish had figured out how to grind their oats. And some people say that the reason the Scottish and the Irish grew it is because the English didn't tax animal feed. But I know for a fact that it grew very well in Ireland and Scotland, and that's why they grew it. So, got to make sure that there's always grain going between these stones. If there's not, they can overheat and crack in a matter of minutes. The Irish and Scottish, when they were grinding their oats, learned that if you put them on a perforated sheet of steel and build a fire beneath it, it pops the oats. Kind of like popcorn, but not as dramatically, just enough to loosen that bran. You blast that useless oat bran away with a nice air blast, and you gather what's left. This is 1838. They didn't know oat bran was good for you. So they throw out all of that bran, or they give it to their pigs, and then they eat what's left, but they grind it up. And so Irish and Scottish porridge oats are chunky. You go buy Irish cut oatmeal in 2007, it's chunky oats, not the rolled oat mush that we're used to. Rolled oats couldn't be made until about 1880 when they started using steel rollers to do their grinding. Steel rollers are better than stones. If you contact 2 stones, you get chunks of stone in your food. If you contact 2 steel rollers, you get dents in one of the rollers. Big deal. So, in the 1830s, in New England, which means we're predominantly English ancestry here in New England, you wouldn't eat the oats, you would feed them to your animals. Because you saw what they looked like when they went in, right? Now, this is before, this is after. The corn gets broken up pretty good. But the oats, after, a couple more out here. And before, not a whole lot of difference. All that you've done is crack the bran on the oats. By cracking the bran, you allow the digestive juices from your animals to access the nutrients inside that shell. If you leave the shell on it, the bran, the Egyptians proved that you can store that stuff for up to 3,000 years. They didn't mean to. They put it in the pyramids for the pharaoh's use in the afterlife. 3,000 years later, we opened up the pyramids. There's all that grain that's been dry, insect, and rodent-free. And that's the 3 things that you need to do in order to maintain your grain, to make sure it's dry, insect, and rodent-free. But because it was kept dry and free of the insect and rodent problem, when they planted some of it after 3,000 years in storage, it grew. The bran is a protective coating that the seed puts on itself. The plant puts it on there so that until that seed has the appropriate environmental conditions, it will not grow. You can feed it to your animals like this, and all that you're doing is giving the plant a new location and a pile of fertilizer, because it does not get digested with that bran attached. That's how the plants spread themselves. So, as long as that bran is intact, you keep it dry, you keep the insects and the rodents out of it, you can store it for basically an unlimited amount of time. Now over here on our coal chest, we have a gap beneath it. That's so your cats and dogs that are patrolling your milk can see the rodents that are hiding inside and eat your grain. They don't kill them. They don't call them rat terriers for the fun of it. That's their natural enemy. That's what they attack on site. We have a Chihuahua. Chihuahuas, you don't think of being what they are. They're actually a desert animal. Their natural prey are insects, lizards, and rodents. So, our Chihuahua is a pretty decent mouse. To your specifications, and you would take it home. The reason only once a month is because after a month's time, ground corn goes rancid. rancid. You don't want to eat rancid bread, do you? I don't. So you make sure that your corn is whole grain until it's time to grind it. Because I'm not allowed to charge you cash money to grind your grain, K-Ball. I'm only allowed 1/16 of the grain that you bring in. If you bring in a 1 bushel basket, the smaller basket of the 2 on the wall over here, I take 2 quarts. 2 quarts is 1/16 of a bushel. I take that 2 quarts and I pour it in my coal chest. And then somebody who doesn't have a farm, a doctor, a lawyer, a printer, comes in and needs grain because, well, bread is one of the mainstays of the American diet in the 1830s and still is today. Whoa, 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 whoa. Not supposed to feed that rapidly. Well, it's still cracked corn. You don't want this to be a real dusty mix because this is going to your animals. And if it's dusty, horses and cattle continue to breathe while they're swallowing. Humans can't. It's one or the other. So, with that in mind, you grind it a little coarser for your animals. I'll take it and I'll show it to you and say, hey, is that coarse enough for you for your feed? Yeah. If you say yes, then I'll leave it. If you say no, I want a little coarser or I want it a little finer, I adjust that screw in the corner. What that does is raises and lowers my top stone. By raising and lowering that top stone, I can adjust the grind from what it is now down to about the thickness of that mat guide. That piece of paper right there in your hands.
What keeps the
We
stone?
can get it thin enough so that it'll do that. Now, we can't grind too much grain because we can actually grind enough grain that we can outproduce anything our animals can eat. We can grind 4 to 6 bushels an hour. That's part of the reason we only grind about 40 minutes a day. We've been grinding for the last 15 minutes or so, and because that thing suddenly decided it wanted to feed fast, we shut it down. And so if you have questions about anything, by all means, feel free to ask them. In the meantime, I'm just going to be cleaning up this over here. Our water wheel is designed, it's a low breast wheel, which means the water, strikes just below the midline of that wheel. It's the weight of the water that causes the wheel to turn, rather than the impact, like over at the gristmill, over at the carding mill, and over at the sawmill. It's the water pressure and the reaction of the way the water strikes the wheel that causes it to turn. Over here, it's just simple weight. We use, at maximum, about 120 gallons a second to produce about 8 horsepower. Well, it's less efficient than the wheels that we have over at the sawmill. The sawmill wheels are roughly 3 feet in diameter and 6 inches wide. There's 2 of them. This wheel out here is about 16 feet in diameter and 8 feet wide. And it's less efficient than those little ones. We produce less horsepower with more water with this wheel than we do with those over there. And actually the tub wheel in the carding mill is the most efficient wheel that we have here. The more water you give to a tub wheel, the more efficient it is. And they were getting up to 85% efficiency out of the tub wheel. About 50% out of the wheels over there, and probably about 40 out of this. Now, that doesn't sound all that good, but if you take into account that modern internal combustion engines are somewhere in the 30s for percentile efficiency, at best, you know that water is actually the better source of power. Think about this. 2007, we don't use direct water power, we use indirect water power. The indirect water power is the water turning a turbine to create electricity. Whether it's hydroelectric, whether it's tidal, whether it's fossil fuels, whether it's nuclear energy. Fossil fuels, you heat water to create steam to turn the turbine. Nuclear energy, you heat water to create steam to turn the turbine. Otherwise, it's just direct water power. So unless you're using solar or wind power, 90% of the energy created, the electrical energy created today, is water power. Electricity is just a lot easier to transport. You can't transport a river over great distances, but you can transport electricity as far as you want, provided you keep bumping up the power a little bit. Because you will have some power loss, because all things have some amount of resistance.
How do you keep stone dust from getting into the flour when the two stones are turning?
They should never contact. They should be spinning on a perfect horizontal plane without contacting, and only the top stone spins. So, in here, unfortunately it's over there, we have a lead weight on the surface of the stone. And that weight is kind of like the weight they put on your car tire to keep it from wobbling when you're driving down the road. This weight keeps the stones from wobbling horizontally rather than wobbling on a vertical plane. So, the faster you spin those stones, the less likely they are to contact. The closer to a perfect gyroscope they create. So,
Do you have any problem with mice?
not in the 1830s, because you had cats and dogs patrolling your mill. In 2007, no, it's chipmunks.
If you walk around the back of the building, you'll see about 100 nests in the building.
The chipmunks consider this an all-you-can-eat buffet. Because until we actually remove the back, there's always a little bit of grain that's caught between the edges of the stones and the back. And the chipmunks go down in there and clean it out for us. We empty it out.
Starting with the water wheel outside, when everything was working, and going from the outside to the obvious about 20 feet. The question is, the transfer of power, is it the same at the end as it was in the beginning?
No, there's always the loss of power when you transfer from one gear to another. There's always a loss of power through friction.
Yeah, but the 16-to-1 is firm, because you have two brushes, much like you would be brushing your pet. And the average person at that time would take about a minute and a half to do one of these properly. It's around like 9 by 4, 5. It isn't so much that you're brushing the ends against each other, but you're trying to brush the wool, all the fibers, in the same direction, getting a nice smooth plate or brush of wool like this. You're getting the fibers, you get the fibers running in the same direction, and then you simply lift these off. When you separate it, and then you would spin the fibers in the same direction, and then you would feed them onto a spinning wheel. Now what would take a person a minute and a half to do here, the carding machine would do the same, would do a larger amount in 1 second, whatever you want. When you exit the building, the first fence post, just walk around underneath the building, you'll see this in operation. The water will feed down through a flume, drop through a drum wheel, which is, like I say, another version of a turbine. It will in turn turn two beveled gears, one horizontally, one vertically, to drive a drum around which this belt passes, or actually there's 2 or 3 drums down below. And leather drive mechanism attaches to each machine. It's a very clever arrangement. You can simply slide by means of this lever. It's attached to a fork. The fork will simply push the leather strap over, engaging the drive mechanism. The machine will feed the wool that can drink. Roller, its foam will brush lightly out. It passes around that roller, it's stripped off by the small and fed back on the main drum, and progresses to the next one. And finally it's removed by what's called the fancy, taking it off the main drum, feeding it onto our last wheel here, and if I can get enough material, which it doesn't look like it's going to happen for a few minutes, I would remove this and feed it on to our last roller where the batting would build up to a greater thickness, but that's not going to take place for a few minutes. Now the mechanism is pretty clever because this end wheel is free spinning. It doesn't engage through anything. It's not under a lot of tension. The machines are pretty whisper quiet while they're running. Now all it takes is for me to, again, just to slide this over onto this inner wheel, which instantly engages the center drum. Now the center drum has a leather strap running around it, which in turn revolves around all these wired wheels I mentioned already. You have worker rollers, strippers. How the one is spinning very slow, the other is spinning much quicker. They're all working in the same direction, but the wool is being removed simply by a roller that goes faster than the one that is contacted. This one goes very slow, this one is pulling the wool off, it goes around much quicker, feeding onto the main drum, which goes fast as well. Running. You have a better view of this. You know, there are three sets of, once it's fed into the machine, the main drum, which you may be able to see spinning the fastest, passes onto three sets of workers and strippers. You know, worker and stripper, 1, 2, 3. And you notice how these are spinning at various rates. And they're rotating in the same direction, so the way the wool is passed or removed is that there's one roller that is spinning not so quickly is positioned adjacent to a faster spinning roller, which in turning the same direction simply pulls the wool from it. You know, it's not a situation where they actually come at each other, but one overlaps in effect, pulling the wool, feeding it back onto the main drums, going from worker and stripper to worker and stripper to worker and stripper. And by the time you reach the end, it has brushed it out to a very fine finely brushed wool. As Tom, the gentleman who was here earlier oiling and adjusting the machines, was mentioning, you don't want to overload it, you don't want to put too much on it, but at the same time you want to be producing wool to be brushed that's somewhat nice and thick. Some of these have kind of a whispery look to them, they're a little thin. So you could actually take this and rerun it until it gets this a little thicker, fitting in these flutes and on this, what I believe is a chestnut roll. Because originally these machines were mostly wood made out of pine, maple, birch, and chestnut, but in time the frame for the most part became all metal. No, it's around an 1820 vintage. I'm just saying that they had their prime years, the term was being used from the early 1800s to around 1840. I mean, those were approximate years I'm giving you, it's not etched in stone. But the textile industry really took over, much like, you know, a chain of hardware stores will take over from mom and pop hardware. This was simply a local business meant to service the local farmers or the local community. When the Industrial Revolution produced a number of mills that could do much more in a shorter period of time, and people were paid to bring their wool to the mill, then people saw the advantage of doing that. And even though in the early 1800s, when a person was brushing out their wool, you know, take the average person, say a minute and a half to brush something this size until the wool was nice and brushed out. It would take the machine 1 second to do this. So the machine could do a pound and a half in approximately 10 minutes. The person would take 10 hours to do a pound and a half. So during the period in history where these really provided a service to farmers, they